you explain in general for now what Russian tourists can bring with themselves to EU countries and what they cannot?
So the EU has adopted a wide range of different sanctions to cripple the Kremlin's ability to wage war against Ukraine for its war of aggression against Ukraine. That includes a number of import bans from Russia into the European Union, and that means that those products cannot enter the European Union. To give you a few examples, Russian cars cannot enter the European Union, so if you go to the EU border, those EU member states should not allow those cars to enter. Of course, when it comes to your personal items, member states should, of course, exercise proportionality and reasonableness when implementing those sanctions.
What does it mean proportionality? You can look at me.
Yeah.
What does it mean proportionality? For example, as I understood, every national government can impose their rules. So, for example, if I bring from Russia expensive perfume, everyone can say, no, don't take it. And will you control it somehow? How it will be?
I think when you look at the point of sanctions, the whole point of sanctions is to reduce the revenue that the Kremlin has to wage war against Ukraine. That is the whole point. And when member states are implementing sanctions, they need to make sure that sanctions are not being circumvented and that the effectiveness of the sanctions is maintained. So there is a very big difference between bringing lots of products over to circumvent the EU sanctions. There's a difference between that and then your personal items for a trip to the European Union. So our point in the EU, what we said, is that when member states see these products or these Russian citizens crossing over with products into the EU, they should exercise proportionality. If, for example, somebody has some clothes in a suitcase, their private items, that is okay.
Will you control somehow member states who will overreact? Let's say Baltic countries now started to say that they will not allow Russians to enter with a lot of personal stuff as well. So will you do something for that?
So EU law applies across the European Union in all 27 member states. When it comes to sanctions, it's for each individual member state to implement those sanctions. The sanctions are quite clear. There are products that can enter and there are products that cannot enter. But as I said before, when it comes to your personal items, then the member states should exercise proportionality.
You know that Russian opposition leaders, FDK, Anti-Corruption Foundation, maybe you know them, they already wrote letter to Baltic countries, Baltic states, explaining them exactly what did you say, that personal items and big scale of sanctioned products, it's a big difference. So, do you aware of these letters? Do you have any letters from Russian oppositions? Are you contacted with them, trying to clarify what is actually really going on?
I'm personally not aware of any specific contact on that topic. What I can say is that the European Commission is in contact with all member states to ensure that our sanctions are uniformly applied. We are not aware of any particular case or example where somebody's personal items has been confiscated. That's not at all something that we're aware of. When it comes to cars, that is clear. That is something, cars should not cross into the European Union if they originate in Russia. That is one exception. If the car is owned by a national of a European Union member state, that is allowed.
So will it be a problem or not? Because we already know that one Russian guy was stopped on the border with Estonia, I guess, and he has two passports. He's a European citizen and he's Russian citizen, and his car is registered in Russia, so he wasn't allowed to go with the car. Is it okay, or it's a violation of what you just said?
So the European Commission doesn't actually implement each and every sanction. As I said before, it's for the member states to implement those sanctions, for their national authorities to do so. The Commission makes sure that the sanctions are applied uniformly across the EU. What does that mean? That means that we cannot comment on specific situations. We don't have every single detail in that case. That's for the national authorities to do. But as I said, yes, there is an exemption when it comes to certain goods if a citizen of an EU member state is involved.
Mm-hmm. And my last question, actually two questions. Why right now you decided to clarify this moment with cars? Why exactly now?
I think the import ban has been in place since October 2022, so that's almost a year ago. That's the law. What the Commission does every now and then, or actually quite frequently, is to provide member states with guidance to explain to them how the sanctions should be applied. Why? To make sure that they're uniformly applied across the European Union. We frequently update our guidance. We frequently talk to member states about this. The issue of cars was one that was raised by the member states in the Council, and that's why we decided to issue some guidance to clarify the situation. It doesn't change the rules, it doesn't change the law, it simply clarifies.
Well, we have this news about this new guidance. We also know that 4 Russian oligarchs were excluded from sanction list, European sanctions list. How could you explain that? Because the Russian tourists definitely are not so dangerous for the war in Ukraine than Russian oligarchs who really finance this war. So how could you explain that?
As a starting point, I'd point you to what Peter said on the podium, because this is more his area. But in general, the European Union has sanctioned over 1,800 individuals and entities who are involved one way or another in the war. That's a huge amount of individuals and entities. Of course, certain reasons lead to an individual being delisted, for example, if somebody dies, or if the legal grounds are not enough and the conditions might change. I think in the past a small number of individuals have been delisted, but overall we still have listed over 1,800.
And my last question, what could you recommend, what could you advise to Russian tourists who are, like, let's say, against war, but just try to cross border with EU, what they can bring with themselves and what they cannot, or what they definitely shouldn't take with themselves to be sure that they can pass the border?
I think the EU's sanctions are hard-hitting. They have an impact. There are consequences to the EU's sanctions. Why do we have these sanctions? We have these sanctions because Russia invaded Ukraine, because of its war of aggression. There are consequences to sanctions. So it's for each individual to take their own responsibility and, of course, inform themselves about the consequences of those sanctions. We have a very good website where all of that is explained, but as I said before, it is for each national member state to implement those sanctions on the ground, so perhaps contact those national authorities.
Thank you so much. Thank you.